Welcome back to this third lecture where I will be introduced two elements of the so-called marketing mix, also termed the 4 Ps of marketing: products and prices. In the final lecture, we'll see places, which means distribution, and promotions. Let's start with products. So let me use again this metaphor of the trees. The ICH skills, your know-how, can be employed to make different kind of market offerings, products, services, training, workshops, experiences of many kind, events of many kinds. However, now the point is that they can be changed, they can be adapted to satisfy different kind of consumers. Okay, we already talked about market segmentation, and now the point is that your skills can assume very different forms. So they can be turned into the very different kind of market offerings. And the extra point that I'm highlighting now is that they can change depending on specific needs expressed by different kind of customers. Let's elaborate a little bit on this. And to make a distinction, and again I will use the metaphor of a tree with this beautiful mask made by one West Bengal artist, Dharmendra Sutradhara. To make sense of this distinction of between skills and products in a broad sense, let me use this tool. So roots are skills, know-how, knowledge, traditional ways of doing things. These are in the roots, whereas the fruits can be products, services, training, experiences, everything that can be turned into something that people are willing to pay a price for. These instruments is also a way to make sense of this old debate of tradition versus innovation. Fruits can detach a little bit from the roots of the tradition, but they are still part of the tradition, because ultimately, if you go back in time, every tradition in a given moment in time was something new, maybe resisted by people that say, no, this is too different from what we normally do. Okay, so it can be a way to position yourself and your brand as more or near approximate to the roots of the tradition. Okay, so the point I'm making is that with this tool, and now I'm going to make an example, you can also try to understand what is the essential DNA of your tradition, and you can position products as more or less near. And it's okay if your community over time decides to detach from the roots of the tradition. However, it's important to bear in mind that it would be really a pity if in this process important traditional skills would be forgotten. It happens that sometimes when people look at what their ancestors were able to do, they are like, wow, because we have no idea how to be able to reproduce this. Okay, so sometimes it's very important to document this tradition and tacit know-how behind them before they are lost forever. Okay, so sometimes there are only a few people who know how things were done in the past, and it's so important to ask them to teach, to document the tradition with pictures, with video recording, and so on and so forth, because before they passed away and nobody knows any longer how to do things. So let me repeat again. Sometimes when looking at the roots of the tradition, we employ this idea of a repertoire, which is a fancy word for a complex sets of interconnecting knowledge skills. They have been developed over time, and every generation there's a mix of innovation and tradition, and today's innovation becomes tomorrow tradition. That's the way it is. And it's important that ultimately it's the community that decide what is worth transmitted to the next generation. The fruits, they can be ever changing. The products can be more or less rooted in the tradition because it's normal that there is a mix of innovative and not so innovative products occurring at the same time. Okay, so let me make an example. I will make the example of a tradition which I already made some example on, which is called Bengal Patachitra. West Bengal is a part of India. So here you have a very traditional artist like uh, a master artist and guru Tukusham Chitrakara. He is a guru, meaning that he transmitted the knowledge to new generation. So he's a older and well-respected member of the community. In this tradition, the important skills are making colors, which very often women tended to do, then based on natural colors, based on ingredients like fruits and flowers and roots and leaves, then painting. So the scrolls were made with the paper pasted on sari on other fabrics. Then it's important to know the story. It's important that the stories and the song that go with that, because this is a tradition of singing storytelling. It's important that the stories are not forgotten. And then there's the performance, the actual singing, okay? And already in the tradition, there are cases of innovation because of the stories can be traditional, but the songs there are songs that have been around for decades, songs that have been around for centuries, and occasionally new songs are composed. And this is a skill, this is a part of the tradition because it's not everybody is able to create new songs, but some of the most respected artists are able to do that. Okay, so these are the skills, and with these skills, you can make a lot of products for sales, not necessarily so. Lots of products, services, performances. So the products that are closer to the root are the traditional long scrolls, like the one that the guru is showing us. And you can see in the picture there are many in the background of his house and workshop. Okay, and each scroll is a different song. Okay, and so these products are very traditional, but what happened is that they are very long, and not many people actually, even if they like and appreciate this heritage, not many people would buy them because you cannot hang in the walls of your house this kind of products. So eventually, when tourists express an interest in buying and bringing home something, they started to innovate, and still this is with the traditional, some square scrolls that would be better for hanging. So, for example, just one scroll. And again, okay, the traditional tunes and lyrics are part of the tradition. But what happened is that over the time, the patwas, thanks with to collaboration with some fashion designer, product designers, they started to innovate and use the traditional colors and the traditional motifs to new products like t-shirts, like umbrella, or like the beautiful kettle that you see there, which is based on a traditional story that is the story of the fish marriage, which I do not have time to tell you about. And you can see there are other innovative products. So these products are ways of keeping the traditional alive, because for example, they're not just for tourists, because maybe even the younger generation, they would like a t-shirt with that item, okay? But there's innovation even in the most traditional product. So for example, the artist that you see there, a woman, because now women are singing, and some of them like Miss Surna Chitrakara that you see here in the picture. They are a world famous artist. They traveled outside of India, and she made the news in India, and not only in India, even in United States and Europe, because she composed a new song about the Patachitra, about the COVID-19 virus. So you see there in red, this is her representation of the coronavirus, which is represented in red like a demon. And in this scroll, she shared with the people important educational messages like wearing masks, like give food to the poor, because huge crisis as in many other parts of the world. Okay, so you can see with the traditional skills you can do a lot of products, and maybe in a few years from now they will no longer be interested in a coronavirus scroll, but these artists will surely keep on innovating the tradition. And again, today's innovation will be tomorrow's tradition. So remember, roots and fruits. The roots, it's important not to forget important heritage skills. The fruits can change, okay? But still be more or less near to the roots of the tradition. So another way to look at the relationship between products in a broad sense and tradition, the traditional skills, is how they relate to the tradition. This is a model that was created to make sense of food heritage, but we found can be applicable to many other kind of products. Again, products in a broad sense, market offering. So there can be survivals, products that with a very minimal adaptation have been kept being produced as they were in the past, so no innovation at all, and these may have a market. Most innovation are in the sense of the evolving traditional production. Case number 3 here. It's products like the kettle or a t-shirt with the traditional motifs that have been innovating the tradition to respond to changing needs of the community and of the market in a general sense. Sometimes it's technological progress. So even in crafts, you can adopt some technologies that are labor saving or less time consuming, or that can have a health benefits. Of sometimes you need to respond to the new regulations. For example, for food, there's a lot of hygiene regulation and food safety regulation that needs to be respected. Okay, and if the community accept it, so the key point here is that if they are only done for the tourist, some people might believe that there could be a lack of authenticity. But if the community just embraces the innovation, you are done. Nobody can criticize you for that. So again, a mix of tradition and innovation. Very interestingly, there are also what we could call retro innovation. Sometimes people forget how to do things, but by looking at things of the past, they can decide to do things as they were done in the past. We find a lot of examples of this in food. Sometimes food is made these days in a very industrialized manner, but sometimes there are artisans that take inspiration for innovation from the past and try to reproduce the exact recipe, the precise formula of what people were eating in the 1950s, for example, with cheese, for example, with other oils, with olive oil and many other products. Okay, and again, it's interesting that you can innovate, bringing back something that was very traditional and that has been forgotten. Okay, finally, you can have products that are radically new. So sometimes it's because they adopt new technologies. So industrialization is a way to decrease the cost and increase production volumes. It's okay to do that if this is what the community wants. However, we want to warn you on the fact that by doing that, some heritage skills might be lost, and they are like a treasure. They are the roots of tradition. So it might be important if somebody, not everybody, but if somebody in the community remembers how things were done in the past. Okay? And sometimes these radically innovative products can create some discomfort in the community, so they may say this is not what our tradition is about. And again, there's a lot of discussion about these. It's just words and terms to help you make sense of the different way you can think of innovating. As I was mentioning before, one of the things that you can do, remember segmentation, is try not only to identify differences in your customers, but try to understand if the products or services that would satisfy them the most can be designed in a different ways. So sometimes it happens that products for locals would be different from products for tourists. Sometimes it happens that older people prefer products in a different way respect to younger people. Sometimes it can be that men and women might have a different point of view on what they like, and so on and so forth. So it's very important that when you design new products or when you interact with customer, you really try to understand what different kind of people want, so that you can adapt. You can use your skills to adapt your offer to satisfy these specific kind of customer groups. And the other point that you can think about is that not everybody is the same, and sometimes there are a group of people who are not interesting for you as customers because they want something that, from your point of view, it's not worthwhile to offer. So they express needs that you do not necessarily want to satisfy because they want cheap prices and your products have value. So you cannot offer them at very small prices because it will not compensate your work and would not be good for the reputation of the tradition, for example. Okay, so one way you can formalize this reflection would be to use what we call the heritage product market metrics. This is an example. Of course, this is just an example. You have to think of your own, but it's built like this. You look at different market segments, men, women, young, older, people from this area, people living in big cities, tourists, locals, and many other things. And you can think if there's something that you can do to design products or market offering that really reflect the needs expressed by these kind of people. So, for example, we can find, for example, that there's a group of what we call the heritage-aware tourists living in big cities who want authentic products, so products that are really done as they were done in the past. So these people might be mostly women and over 45 years. They represent a limited part of the market, but maybe they are willing to pay the full price for very artisanal products, incorporating all those traditional skills we saw before. Okay, so you may realize that there is a market for limited quantities of products sold at a higher price. So these would be products near to the roots of the tradition. And of course, this might be 10% of the total market, 5% of the total market. And maybe not all the businesses in this context will need to focus on that. Maybe the specialization of few established artists. Then you can have tourists from big cities that are not so heritage aware. They will be willing to pay okay, but not as much. So they are more interested maybe in the product aesthetics rather than the cultural value. They like it because it's a flashy color and they can think of wearing it, mixing and matching if it's a fashion product with something else, but they don't really know a lot about the cultural heritage. And these might be quite important part of the market, say 50% of the market. So it doesn't make sense to try and sell the product line, the traditional top of the line to these people because it's too expensive. You scare them if you say the price on that, and maybe the aesthetics is very old fashioned and they wouldn't particularly like it. So you can play with your heritage and do something that makes sense for these customers. For example, you can still do them handmade, this hypothetical example, but with some labor-saving techniques. You can delegate a part of the production process to younger members of the community who are part of the apprentice system, so they do not have the they do not master yet all the detailed nuances of the most advanced techniques, but still you can do that. So you can sell at a price that is okay. You save a little bit on the labor cost and the time to produce that, and you can play with traditional motifs, adapting them to local taste, to current tastes, and you can do a lot of variation to satisfy the need for novelty. Okay, so this we call that traditional middle range. So when you decide what to produce, if you're thinking of a heritage-aware tourist or price-aware tourist, you probably end up using the same skills or similar skills to do something that looks very different and is sold at a very different price. Another market segment, local consumers from nearby villages. They maybe want products that remind the tradition, but with innovative elements. So, for example, can be not tourists, but local people, younger people. If it's a fashion item, they maybe do not want to be dressed exactly as their parents. They want something new. So, maybe they are not willing to spend that much because they are not from wealthy background. It doesn't mean that you don't care about these tourists. Remember, what makes cultural heritage a living thing is that it's members of the communities that buys this product. This is what keeps them authentic. Okay. So you can have products that are not so expensive, that reinterpret the traditional elements in line with the contemporary tastes and needs. Okay, so sometimes it can be made by younger members of the community because they are part of a new generation, so it's natural for them to adapt into them. And they can be sold at reasonable prices and maybe in a different distribution channel, so local shops. Maybe the packaging would be different and no need to have the labels in translating different in languages like English or whatever. So again, you can think different packaging, different distribution channels, and so on and so forth. Finally, in these examples, there are also a market segment called the price-sensitive tourists who are not really interested for this community. They just want cheap souvenir. They can they are not particularly knowledgeable of the community we're talking about, and probably they would be just okay with industrial product that cost nothing, basically. So you may take the strategic decision, not to serve this market segment. So you forget them. So it's true that sometimes the customer is king or queen, but you do not need to do something to satisfy everybody. Okay, so these different product lines may be offered by the same business, or you can decide. Remember, focalized market strategy. You can decide to offer only traditional top of the line, or only traditional middle range, or only trendy products to different market segments. Okay, so this is how you put together innovation with segmentation. Every market segments will be requiring specific kind of products. Okay, so again, this is an example, but really reflect on this. This is a very useful tool to strategically reflect on how you can adapt your heritage skills to satisfy the need of different market segments, and then you can decide if you have what it takes to serve them all, or to make a more selective choice. So I also want to introduce this idea that sometimes listening to the client during normal interaction, or more formally with market research, but it can be as easy as looking at online what is the conversation surrounding your products. Sometimes customers can give you ideas for innovation. So let me introduce you to this gentleman, Mr. Dharmendra Sutradhar, who's a chow mask maker. So these masks are worn by artists for dancing. So chow dance is again an Indian tradition, and these are the big masks that are made for dancers, but smaller masks eventually started being produced as diversified products, as home decor objects to be hung at walls in the house. So one day, this artist made a customer that didn't like flashy decorative items on the masks. He didn't like plastic. He said plastic is not a good thing. What had happened in this tradition as it innovated is that since the dancers wanted the big masks with the flashy objects, and natural colors were not as flashy, as beautiful to see, when plastic decorative items became available, the mask makers started to use them. This was the request of the dancers. Okay, so it was how the tradition had evolved. But now, what happened was that this artist met a customer who didn't like plastic. He say, "I like your masks, but I cannot buy something with plastic because I care about the environment. I don't want something with plastic in my home." And then this artist listened to the voice of the customer and say, okay, give me 3 days and I'll do something. So he worked like crazy, and he used lentils or dal, you see the orange spot, and rice, which is in the area where they live, they grow rice. So he made these beautiful masks with natural items. The colors are not so flashy as plastic decorative items, but the client was super happy. And not only by satisfying this client need, this artist may concluded a sale. Just a sale wouldn't change much. But then he realized that there's a market for more environmental friendly masks. And this opened the way to targeting new market segments and using his skills to satisfy the need of this kind of customer. Okay, and there are many, maybe they're growing, and he has found that many people are interesting. And what is a little bit ironic is that if you remember my chart of a few slides ago, this is something that could be termed a retro innovation, because in the past, probably many more people like these artists, these contemporary artists, were using natural ingredients locally available like rice or lentils to make the mask. Unfortunately, he had to rediscover how to do that. He could, because these skills was forgotten. So we do not know if these masks are exactly as they were done 80 years ago, but maybe they are, because the environment has changed. So but it's something new that looks at the past as a source of inspiration. Okay, so let me conclude by talking about price. Pricing is an important decision because it's about giving value to your products. So sometimes artists find it very difficult to give a value to their products, particularly if they are unique. And so, to set the price of an object, you can adopt three different logic. The first logic is how much did it cost to me? Here you have to consider the cost of the components, the ingredients, the element, so everything that you buy to make the product, and this is a part. And then you have to look at the value of your labor. So ask yourself how much 1 hour of my time, considering my skill level, my seniority, the quality level I'm able to produce. So how much 1 hour is worth, and then you multiply for the number of hours of you, of everybody involved. And finally, you look, you include a percentage of the fixed cost of your operation. Okay, and again, there are different logic that you can use. And then these are the cost. And then you should add a little more, a fair markup, so that you can make a profit. Okay, so it's the cost and the value of labor. Then you can look at what your other competitors, remember, they can be your neighbor, they are members of the same community, they are not your enemies, but it's the others. So what are the others doing that offer similar products? And again, customers offer compare price. So if you have a price that is much higher than the average, your sales will be reduced. If you have a price that is much lower, you will sell a lot, but maybe you're not going to really make a profit. Okay, so look at what the others are doing. And finally, the third logic, which is the most market-oriented logic, is that how much a given customer is willing to pay. Maybe your price is easier and they are not willing to pay that price, so no sale. Sometimes the price is here, but they are willing to pay much more because sometimes they give more value. They attribute more value to your products than you yourself. think of it. And again, this is interesting. If you remember the idea of different market segments, you will find out that often the customer perceived value changes, varies across market segments. Okay, so sometimes you can sell a similar product or a product that is mostly the same with some minor changes like in packaging or in where it is distributed, and you can discriminate price, which means you can sell the same products at different price levels. Okay, and it depends on your reputation also. Remember what we when we talk about reputation and branding, etc., the more people know you, the better is your image, and the more favorable is the evaluation of the quality of your work, the more people will be able to say. So this is why I will see in the next lecture, promotion is always important. Okay, so how to set appropriate prices. Here, there are some guidelines. You need to adapt to your specific cases. So try to calculate the cost of production, including a fair margin to take into consideration the artist times skill. So try to look at the market price and try to see if your product is average or maybe is a little better from some point of view or a little different. Remember differentiation from the last lecture. Okay, so try to put a financial value to those differences. So my products are better in this specific way, so maybe clients will be to pay a little more. How much? It's a matter for you to decide. But if you see that other products are sold at a higher price because they are better, so you may do a little bit of discounting because your product doesn't have the same quality forever. Okay, but again, try to repeat this operation for the different market segments, because something that is different and it's relevant for a market segment may be the most important thing for another market segment. For example, when I'm traveling abroad, for me it's important for fragile items that the packaging will preserve them from everything that can happen during my journey. Okay, so packaging may be important, and a good packaging that protects the items is something important to me. If you live nearby, it doesn't make sense. Okay, it's not really so relevant. Okay, I covered point 5, and again, try to set a price that covers a cost and is acceptable to specific market segments based on their willingness to pay. Okay, and sometimes clients who do not know the products, do not have the technical skills to understand differences. So you have to explain them. So you can do verbally during negotiations, or you can do that with your packaging, with your promotion, with your labels, and so on and so forth. Okay, so try to justify, in case you have a higher prices, why your product is worth more than others, because sometimes differences that are evident to you who know very well the products are not so evident to somebody else. So let me make a practical example. This is a flower. White flower prices in a village in the mountains, in the Alps, in Switzerland, called Poschiavo, where I happened to spend quite some time. So this is the price of 1 kilo of white flour. So you make bread, you make many cakes out of this. It's something that it's mostly in every house. But depending on the production methods, you see that the prices are very different. They can range from 1 Swiss franc per kilo to 250 to 460. And you see, the first is the cost leader. It's you cannot buy 1 kilo flour for less than this amount. And here you add something because the flour is coming from wheat of good quality, but is locally milled. So people know that it's made nearby, and they are willing to pay 1 franc 50 more respect to the baseline product. And here on the right, you see not only flour that is organic, but it's also locally ground, locally milled, and that comes from the local area. So you could talk to the farmers who grow the wheat upon which the flour is made, and people are willing to pay more, what is called a premium price respect to the other product. So you can see, and of course, through packaging, through interaction, through what you write on your social media, etc., you need to explain these differences, because otherwise, why people should pay no more? They need to understand the differences. Okay, so please do explain the differences. So to conclude this third lecture, heritage skills can be employed to develop a different kind of market offerings and to adapt them to the needs of different market segments. Okay, so innovation is often at the core of a business success. Even on sustainable development, you need to adapt to evolving changes, evolving need. Everything changes, you need to adapt to survive. But please do not remember your roots. Try to make sure that no important heritage skills is forgotten. Somebody in the community need to remember how to do things and document this precious knowledge before it's lost, because sometimes you can retro-innovate, you can revitalize the roots before they die. Okay, important. And finally, think of prices not something that you only do to maximize your profit. It's something that you need to consider these pricing strategies to be sure that everybody benefit from your entrepreneurial idea. People you work with, higher prices, you can pay them more. Family members who may be working with you, and everybody else. So distributors and everybody else. And again, remember this notion of the different willingness to pay of different market segments. Okay, sometimes you can just discriminate your price, and it is. So thank you for your attention, and that's all for now.